Okay, I think it's time to start. So let's begin this next session. And in this session, we'll be looking at the next variation of the breath practice, that is focusing at the abdomen. But first, let's start with a meditation and continue the practice we introduced in the last session, that is to focus on the breath, the full body breath practice. So just noticing any sensations in the body connected with the breathing, associated with the breathing. And the main emphasis here is on relaxation. So let's do that practice now. So again, finding a nice comfortable posture, let's begin. As an act of loving kindness for yourself, allow your awareness to descend into the body and simply become aware of sensations throughout the body. Using the out-breath to relax and release any tightness or tension in any part of the body. And softening and relaxing all the muscles in the face. Mouth and jaw soft and relaxed. And all the muscles around the eyes soft and relaxed. In this way, allowing the entire body to become completely relaxed, completely at ease. And relaxing more deeply with each out-breath. Allowing the breathing to flow naturally and effortlessly. And with each out-breath, letting go of any thoughts that may have arisen, happily releasing them. And simply allowing the mind to come to rest in the stillness of the present moment. Relaxed, still and clear. And from that stillness, start to become aware of the sensations of the breath throughout the body. Wherever you most easily notice any sensations associated with the breathing. And maintaining an ongoing flow of mindfulness of the sensations of the breath throughout the entire cycle of each in and out breath. And if you find that you get distracted from the breath, remember the first thing to do is simply relax. Then release the distraction and very gently return to focusing on the breath. So relax, release, and return each time you get distracted. The main emphasis in this practice is relaxation, but without allowing yourself to sink into dullness or drowsiness, maintaining whatever clarity you began with. And if you do find yourself falling into dullness or drowsiness, then refresh your interest in the practice. Restore your attention on the breath and retain that ongoing flow of mindfulness of the breath. So refresh, restore, and retain. And we can bring the meditation to a close. So let's have a look at what we'll be covering in this session. Again, we'll start with a short review of some of the earlier points, and then we'll look at the tools that we'll be using, that we use in this practice, the faults that can arise in this practice and how to overcome them, then the actual practice of the breath practice of the abdomen, and then we'll do a guided meditation on that, and then some general tips for practice in general, and then time for question answer again at the end of the session. So what we saw in the earlier sessions, of course, is that when we talk about meditation practice, then meditation is, practice is two parts. There's meditation and integrating into daily life, but also meditation itself has two parts, the preparation and the actual meditation. And so in the first session, we looked at preparation, how to prepare ourselves well at the beginning of each meditation session. And so there we looked at in terms of preparing body, speech, and mind. Preparing body, of course, is to set up a comfortable posture, good posture. Preparing the speech was really about allowing the breathing to settle in its natural rhythm and to let go of any sort of negative, agitated states of mind. And then at the most subtle level, preparing the mind, again, letting go of any mental activity and allowing the mind to come into the present moment in a very relaxed and clear way. And from that basis, then we can effectively engage in the actual meditation session. And so in the actual meditation practice, we jumped over there. We were looking at the qualities that we saw that in the meditation, the old meditation texts, generally there are two qualities that are mentioned, stability, clarity, but we added the third quality here of relaxation, something that I think we in the modern world really have to pay attention to because we don't tend to be normally very relaxed. In fact, we tend to bring a lot of agitation and tension to meditation practice. And then we simply, like we do in daily life, we tense to focus, and then we have all sorts of problems in meditation. So really the first thing we need to do in this and all meditation practices is establish that basis in relaxation. It's only on the basis of a relaxed mind that we can really cultivate any sort of sustainable stability and clarity. And we'll look at that a little bit more in the next session because it's a very important point. But here then, in terms of objects, we saw there that, quoting from a Sangha there, that if involuntary thoughts particularly dominate your behavior, then focus your mind on mindfulness of exhalation and inhalation of the breath. So Sangha, great Indian master from the 4th century, is recommending that anyone who has a lot of discursive thoughts to focus on the breath. And so I think this accounts for about 95% of the modern day population. We tend to be all caught up in our conceptual thinking, so much so that we've often lost touch with our own body. So the breath can be very helpful for us in the modern world to really help us to get out of that obsessive compulsive thinking, discursive mind, and get into the body and get out of the past and future into the present moment. And so for many of us, the breath will probably be the best object to use for this practice, at least initially when we get into the early stages of the practice. And here in this weekend retreat, that's what we're focusing on, of course, mindfulness of breathing. 3 variations of that. We looked at the full body. We're about to look at the abdomen practice, focusing on the abdomen. And in the next session, then the nostrils, focusing at the entrance of focusing at the entrance of the nostrils. And then next retreat, we're going to be using those 2 other objects that Alan Wallace particularly recommended for us in the modern world, using the mind as the object. In other words, to observe the mind and whatever comes up in the mind, meaning observing our thoughts. and the other practice of turning the awareness in upon itself and just knowing we're aware, resting in awareness itself. And each of those, as we're going to see in the next retreat, of course, have their own unique benefits, and they're particularly helpful for us in the modern world. And again, the bottom line though, with using a particular object for this practice, is use the object that works best for you. And of course, that doesn't necessarily mean the one that's easiest, because we need to be enthusiastic about it. If we don't have enthusiasm, then as we're going to shortly see, the practice won't really go anywhere. So even though you may find the breath easiest, if you're not very enthusiastic about it, and you can't get enthusiastic, but you're really enthusiastic about, say, the mind or resting in awareness, but you find them more difficult, then maybe they are actually the best object for you. So we really need to have that enthusiasm in the practice. So let's go to the topics for this session now. First, tools. What tools do we use in this practice? And so here we see a little picture, which is actually part of one of the two handouts. So there's this chart that we're going to use tomorrow morning. So if you have that already printed out, then you can look at that. Otherwise, here, this diagram we see on the slide is at the bottom part of the diagram of the shamatha chart. And so here we see the meditator, and the elephant is the mind, and you see it running wildly ahead of the meditator, meaning at the beginning stages of practice, our mind, we find that our mind is completely out of control. And here's a very nice quote from a meditation text by a great Indian master, Baba Viveka, from the 6th century. In his meditation text, he says, "The out of control elephant of the mind," and the elephant is often symbolizing the mind, "is to be bound to the firm post of the observed object using the rope of mindfulness and gradually brought under control by the hook of introspection." And so this is often the symbolism, the analogy used in this particular practice, that the elephant is the mind, and we're to bring the elephant of mind under control by tying the elephant of the mind by the rope of mindfulness to the object. So, of course, we tie the elephant with the rope to a stake to subdue it, and then brought under control by the hook of introspection. So these are the two tools that we use in this practice. And we see this in the diagram here. In the meditator's left hand, we see that rope, that's the rope of mindfulness. And in the meditator's right hand is the hook of introspection. So let's now have a look at these two tools in a little bit more detail and see how they are defined. First, mindfulness. Now, mindfulness here is a translation of the original Sanskrit term smrti or the Pali term sati. And both smrti and sati literally mean memory, to remember. So mindfulness is really our ability to remember the object, to hold the object, to not forget it. And we see that here in the way it's defined. This first quote is again from Alan Wallace's Attention Revolution. He says, "Mindfulness refers to attending continuously to a familiar object without forgetfulness or distraction." And then we have a quote from a meditation text by another great Indian master, Buddhist master, Buddhaghosa, from the 5th century. And he says, "Mindfulness has the characteristic of remembering. Its function is not to forget. It is manifested as guarding." So what we see here is that mindfulness, this rope of mindfulness, is we are holding the object with the rope of mindfulness. So mindfulness is to hold the object, to remember the object, to not forget it. Now, what we need to be aware of is that in a lot of modern day mindfulness traditions, and of course, mindfulness is very popular in the modern day, what we need to be aware of is in a lot of modern traditions, the word mindfulness has been redefined to mean something slightly different. And we often see in modern traditions, it's defined as something like a non-judgmental awareness of whatever is arising in the present moment. So this is a very common way of using the word mindfulness in modern traditions. Of course, there's nothing wrong with that. It's very good to be able to do that. But this is not really how the word mindfulness was originally defined and used in the Buddhist context. So we need to be aware of this difference of usage of the word mindfulness. Otherwise, there can be some confusion arising. So again, mindfulness here is simply remembering the object, to hold the object, to not forget the object. And then the second tool we see here is introspection, symbolized by the hook. And in Sanskrit, this is samprajanya. And introspection is really quality control, is to monitor our mindfulness, is to monitor whether we are still holding the object. Are we becoming dull or distracted? And so here we see that way is defined in, again, Attention Revolution. Alan Wallace says, introspection is a mental faculty of having the function of monitoring the state of one's body and mind. And again, quoting Buddhaghosa, he says, introspection has the characteristic of non-confusion. Its function is to investigate. It is manifested as scrutiny. So what we are doing is investigating our body and mind. So basically, introspection is quality control. For example, noticing if our body is tense, to relax it. But particularly here, if we're talking about using the object of the breath, introspection is monitoring our mindfulness. Mindfulness, of course, is holding the breath, is being mindful of the sensations of the breath. Introspection is quality control, is noticing whether we are still focusing on the breath or not, or are we starting to become dull and distracted? So these are the two main tools that we use in this practice, the rope of mindfulness and the hook of introspection. So then the next topic is faults. What sorts of faults can arise in this practice and how do we overcome them? And here we have another quote from this great Tibetan Buddhist master, Panchen Losang Cheki Gyaltsen, again from 16th, 17th century, particularly in the master in the Mahamudra system of practice. And in his shamatha part of his meditation text, he says, shamatha is attained by progressing through the 9 stages, relying on the 8 antidotes to abandon the 5 faults. And so again, here we have this diagram that we're going to be looking at tomorrow morning, this windy road. And along this windy road, there are 9 stages. And the top diagram in the middle at the top is the goal of shamatha. So he says that we can move along these 9 stages by relying on 8 antidotes to abandon 5 faults. So let's have a look at these faults and the antidotes. So the first fault is laziness. And of course, like any activity we're doing in daily life, laziness can be a fault. If we're very lazy, we're not going to do the activity at all. So we're not going to progress in anything in our life. So similarly here, if we're very lazy when it comes to this practice, of course, we're not going to progress. So how do we overcome laziness? Here we see actually 4 antidotes, but they're a little bit sort of sequential. And the first antidote is faith. So like everything in daily life, if we see no benefit in some activity, then of course we're going to be very lazy when it comes to doing that activity. So similarly here, if we don't appreciate the benefits of this shamatha practice, then of course we're going to be very lazy in doing the practice. So the first antidote is to reflect on the benefits of the practice, to see how this practice is going to benefit us. And we saw earlier in the first session that in everyday life level, of course, it'll improve our attention skills and we'll become more effective, better mental balance, we'll become the masters of our mind, we'll enjoy pleasures more, often sleep and health benefits. And then, of course, at that deeper level, this shamatha practice is the gateway to genuine happiness. So if we can reflect on these benefits, then we'll develop the first antidote, faith. We'll have faith that this practice is really going to benefit us. And so then the more faith we have in the practice, the more aspiration we'll generate for the practice, the more we'll want to do the practice. And then the more we aspire to do the practice, then the more effort or enthusiasm we'll actually put into the practice. And then the more effort or enthusiasm we have in the practice, the more we'll gain the fourth antidote, pliancy. Pliancy here is flexibility and serviceability of body and mind. Now our body and mind are not very pliant or flexible. We have a lot of aches and pains in the body and a lot of resistance in the mind to the practice. But as we go deeper into the practice, then both our body and mind become much more flexible, much more pliant, much more serviceable. So these are the four antidotes to laziness. Then the second fault here we see is forgetfulness. And forgetfulness here can mean either forgetting the instructions or forgetting the object. And so the antidote to forgetfulness is mindfulness, is to remember the instructions, to remember the object, to hold the object. And then the third fault here is this pair of laxity and excitation, which are the technical words for dullness and distraction. And we'll look at those two a little bit more detail in the next slide. And the antidote to that is introspection. Introspection, again, quality control. Introspection is to notice if we're becoming dull or distracted. And then the fourth fault is non-application. Non-application here means that we've fallen into dullness and distraction and we don't do anything about it. That's a fault. That's non-application. So therefore, the antidote to that is application. Means if we're becoming dull or distracted, then apply a remedy. So again, generally, if we find that we're becoming dull or distracted, it simply means to reapply mindfulness, is to hold the object again with mindfulness. That would typically be one example of application, to reapply mindfulness to the object. But then we have one last fault called over-application. And as a beginner, that's not really a big issue, but it can become a bit of an issue as we get deeper into the practice. And over-application means that is the case where we're actually focusing well on the object and we're unnecessarily adjusting our focus. So that's a problem. So of course, the antidote to that is equanimity. And here equanimity means balance. It means our mind is already balanced. So just leave it as it is. So of course, the saying here is, if it's not broken, don't fix it. So these are the 5 faults. And if we apply these 8 antidotes to these 5 faults, then we can slowly move along these 9 stages to shamatha. And we'll be looking at some of these stages in the first session tomorrow morning. So those are the faults and antidotes. So let's just have a little bit more of a look at this laxity and excitation. So remember I said that these are the technical terms for dullness and distraction. So we often find instead of distraction, the word excitation, and that is because excitation is the most common form of distraction, that we're pulled away by something exciting, something interesting, the so-called sense pleasures. And so that's shown here in this shamatha diagram, the 5 sense pleasures. If we look down towards the bottom on the left, we see some fruit. So that is symbolizing taste. To the right of that, we see a silk cloth. So that's tactile. And then slightly above that, we have these 2 round objects here, which are symbols. So that is sound. And then to the left of that here, we have a shell with a conch shell with some perfume in it. So that is smell. And then diagonally above up here, we have a round object, which is a mirror. So that's visual. So these are the 5 sense objects, which are the most common form of distraction. So hence often in the meditation text, distraction is listed as excitement or excitation. And the technical word for dullness is laxity. And here we've already briefly in the meditation introduced a couple of key terms we can use as a beginner to help us to know what to do if we become dull or distracted. Generally, if we get distracted, one of the very first things we tend to do is we get frustrated that we got distracted, and then we tend to think that we got distracted because we weren't focusing hard enough, so we clamp down more forcefully. So to counteract that natural tendency, then the very first thing to do once we find that we've become distracted is simply relax. Relax the body and mind, and then release the distraction, and then very gently return to the object, here in this case, of course, the breath, without clamping down more forcefully. So relax, release, return. So that can help remind us what to do in the event of distraction. Similarly, in terms of dullness, we have three key terms here that can help us remind us what to do. Now, one of the most common reasons that we tend to fall into dullness or drowsiness is that we've simply lost interest in the practice. So then one of the very first things we can do when we're falling into dullness or drowsiness is refresh our interest in the practice, maybe even reflecting on the benefits very briefly, and then restore our attention on the object, and then make sure we retain that ongoing flow of mindfulness of the object. So refresh, restore, and retain. So there are a couple of key words that you may find helpful, particularly when we're in the beginning stages of this shamatha practice. So that brings us to the actual practice now. So here we are moving to the next variation of the breath practice. So we've already done the full body now, which is just focusing on the sensations of the breath anywhere within the body. And that was particularly good for relaxation. So here the object is the tactile sensations of the rising and lowering of the abdomen as you breathe. So of course, again, we're using this bare attention, which means we're not visualizing or imagining somehow the movement of the abdomen, but we are actually observing the sensations of the rising and lowering of the abdomen directly. And as with the earlier practice, balance. So in the earlier practice, of course, the emphasis was on relaxation. So the balance was to relax without losing the clarity you began with. Here, now with this practice, we are working on stability. We're enhancing stability, but without losing relaxation. So we are maintaining that basis of relaxation at the same time then of enhancing stability of attention. So we're not enhancing stability at the cost of losing relaxation, of tightening. And so this balance, we tend to either go one of two ways. We either tend to go into agitation, tension, distraction, or we drift into dullness and drowsiness. And so what we can do is we can do this balancing on each breath. And that is that on the out breath is a natural time to really relax and release any tightness or tension. And the in breath is a natural time to arouse and refresh and sharpen the focus. So therefore we can balance there that relaxation with the stability or the focus of attention on each breath. So we have those terms again, the three key terms for each one: for distraction, relax, release, return; for dullness, refresh, restore, retain. And then what we're going to do in this practice, partway through the meditation, is we're going to introduce a temporary short-term strategy, because one of probably the most common fault in the initial stages of these practice is distraction. And so we can introduce counting the breath as a short-term strategy to help improve stability of attention, to help reduce distraction. Now, this is not part of the standard practice. It's only a temporary short-term strategy. And there is a cost benefit that comes with this, adding this to the practice. The cost is that we're actually adding some conceptual activity of counting the breath. But the benefit is that by occupying the mind with this bit of counting the breath, it can help avoid getting caught up in all sorts of other thoughts and distractions. There are many methods of counting the breath. Some traditions say just keep counting. Some become very elaborate in the counting. Here, what we're going to do in this meditation is we're going to introduce one method, and that is what we're going to do is we're going to count from 1 up to 10, and when you get to 10, you go back to 1. If at any time you lose the count, you simply go back to 1. And we're going to count at the end of each in-breath. Of course, another option is to count at the end of the out-breath. There's many different options, but here we're going to count at the end of in-breath. So at the end of the in-breath, you mentally note 1. Then you focus on the sensations of the breath in the abdomen, on the out-breath, on the following in-breath. At the end of the next in-breath, you mentally note 2. And so this way you count the breath, and that can help to stabilize attention. But again, it's not mindfulness of counting. So the main object is still the sensations of the breath in the area of the abdomen. It's only very briefly at the end of every breath, then you add that count. So we're going to introduce that part way through the meditation and to see whether you find it helpful or not to reduce distraction. Some people find that counting the breath very helpful. Other people find it doesn't really help. It just seems to be another distraction. But we're going to experiment and see if it's useful for you as an individual for helping to stabilize the attention. So that's the practice we're going to do now. So again, we're working on stabilizing the attention now, the emphasis on stability of attention, but of course, without losing the relaxation. So if you'd like to find a nice, comfortable posture, let's begin the practice. Setting the body into a state of relaxation, stillness, and vigilance. And once you've established that comfortable posture, then keeping the body as still as possible, avoiding any unnecessary movement. Allowing the breathing to settle into its natural rhythm. And setting the mind in a state of ease and relaxation. Simply allowing it to come to rest to rest in the stillness of the present moment. Simply being present. Allowing the mind to remain relaxed, still, and clear. And from that stillness, direct your attention to the area of the abdomen and focus on the sensations of the rise and lowering of the abdomen as you breathe. And maintaining an ongoing flow of mindfulness of the sensations of the breath in the area of the abdomen. And monitoring this mindfulness with introspection, noticing when you're becoming dull or distracted. And if you notice any agitation, tension, or distraction, then the first thing to do is simply relax. Then release the distraction and very gently return to focusing on the breath. So relax, release, and return. Or if you're noticing that you're falling into dullness or drowsiness, then refresh your interest in the practice. Restore your attention on the breath, and then retain that ongoing flow of mindfulness. So sharpen your focus on the breath without losing relaxation. Let's now introduce some counting of the breath to help see if it improves our stability of our attention. So remember, at the end of the in-breath, mentally note 1. And then focusing on the sensations of the breath on the following out-breath and the following in-breath. And at the end of the next in-breath, mentally note 2. And so in this way, counting from 1 up to 10, and then go back to 1. If at any time you lose count, go back to 1. So let's now experiment with counting the breath to see if it helps to improve the stability of our attention. And so we can bring the meditation to a close. So just before Q&A, just a couple of general tips for meditation practice in general. So when to meditate? Of course, daily meditation practice, continuity is key to progress. And generally, it's recommended to meditate early in the morning because it's generally when we're most rested, it's most quiet where we are, and of course, a very good start to the day. Very helpful, particularly in the initial stages, to meditate at the same time every day. Because one of the most challenging things about meditating is simply developing the habit. And if we keep changing the time when we meditate, we're not really developing a habit. Whereas if we can pick a time that suits us and stick to that time, then we can develop a habit, and then it becomes much easier. And to develop a habit, it can be helpful to give ourselves some little challenges that, for example, at the start, we can say, okay, at this particular time for the next 7 days, I'm going to meditate at this time. Or if we're a bit more adventurous, for the 30 days, next 30 days, I'm going to meditate at that time. And then we can develop the habit. And once we've developed the habit, then it's much easier to have that as an integral part of our day. Where to meditate? Of course, quiet location. One of the biggest distractions as a beginner is noise. And if we can't find a quiet location where we live, maybe it's quite noisy, I particularly recommend noise cancelling headphones. Very helpful. I use them quite a lot whenever I'm in a noisy environment, when I'm, say, traveling on a plane or something like that, or in a noisy place. I find them very, very helpful. Also to pick ideally, if you at home, if you have a separate room that you can use as a meditation room, close the door, the best. If you can't have a separate room, then at least put aside a corner of a room for meditation, to have a space that is for meditation, and make it inviting and comfortable, and associate that place with meditation. Of course, if you just flop down and meditate on your bed, generally your bed you associate with sleep. So when you meditate on your bed, you may just get very drowsy. So if you have a specific place, which is a meditation place, you can build that mental association, and that's going to be very helpful. And of course, adjust the lighting and the temperature to suit what preferences you prefer. How long to meditate? The general recommendation, of course, as a beginner is to have short sessions, but in general to emphasize quality over quantity. Because if we try and meditate too long, particularly as a beginner, we're not going to be able to sustain that. And what's going to happen for the latter part of the meditation is we're just going to get caught up in complete distraction and complete dullness, which means actually we're increasing the very faults we're trying to decrease. So not a good idea. So always emphasize quality over quantity. If you want to meditate a little bit longer in the morning, you can't sustain it, then break the session into 2 short parts with a little break in the middle. Always emphasize quality over quantity. And particularly as a beginner, very helpful to use a meditation timer, such as we're using in this retreat here. This one I'm using is called Insight Timer. A couple of reasons for that. If we don't use a meditation timer, particularly as a beginner, then what can happen is on days where you sit down and meditate and your mind is agitated, you can't really get into it, you're very drowsy maybe, you try for 5 or 10 minutes and then you go, oh, it's too difficult, and you give up. That's not a good habit, because if we always give up when things get a bit difficult, we're not going to progress in anything in our life. We need to develop the quality of perseverance in the face of difficulty, which means if we set a timer, things are difficult, we'll persevere. So that's very good. On other days, if we don't set a timer, maybe things go really well. And we go, oh, it's going really well today. And so what do? Is we simply keep meditating until when? Until it's not going so well, and then we stop. And the thing we remember most about meditation is how it ended. So if it's always ending on a bad note, we're going to start to associate meditation with not such good experiences. We're not going to want to meditate again the next day. Whereas if we set a timer, it's going well, we finish, we remember that, we'll be very enthusiastic to meditate the following day. But of course, if we really want to get deeper into this practice, then at some point we'll need to increase the duration of our session, but only when ready. And then only increase it in small increments. Don't double it, say, from 20 to 40 minutes, 3 to 5 minute increments. And then we can really start to get deeper into practice. Because if we only ever meditate for 15 minutes, say, in a day, there's only so far we can go. It's a little bit like going to the gym. If we only do 15 minutes of gym work, it's helpful, but we won't get very fit on that. So similarly, to increase duration when we're ready. So that's a few tips about when, where, and how long to meditate. So now we still have some time left for Q&A. So if anyone has any questions, again, switch on the webcam and the mic and ask away.
Hey, hi Glenn, this is Atul.
Atul, how are you doing?
Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, I can hear. Sure.
Okay, so my question was, I had two questions. So the first one related to session one. So you talk about relaxation and just tuning in and letting the tension go on the out breath and just, getting into a state of relaxation. But sometimes what happens to me is if I'm already in a quite a relaxed state, that instruction tends
to speak up a bit. I think you're not near the microphone or something. You're going loud and soft.
Can you hear me?
Yeah,
it's waxing and waning. So maybe if you can go to the other question, I'll just come back. I'll put my headphones on. Yeah.
Right. So the question, I didn't catch the end of the question.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, that's
Glenn?
much better. Okay.
Yeah, you can hear me okay now, right?
Yeah.
So my first question was on the relaxation instruction at the start when you say, just let go on the out breath. And I find that if I'm already quite relaxed, that instruction tends to put a small whirlpool of, let's say, striving, So for me, what works better is, let's say I'm in an agitated state in the body. I just look at that agitation without trying to push it away nor grasp onto it for a few moments, maybe breathing into it. And that works much better than trying to relax.
Yeah.
So can you speak to that? So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, when we say relax, I mean, it's a little bit like, if you've had an, day at work and you're agitated and tense, and then you get home and you sit down on the couch, do you try to relax? No, you just release the tension. So that's why relaxing here, we don't try to relax. We just release the tension. So that's why the out breath is very helpful, because the out breath is a natural time to do that releasing. And as you mentioned, with tension, on the in breath, you can breathe into that tension, and on the out breath, just release it. But yeah, trying to relax is probably not a good idea.
Okay. And so thanks for that, Glenn. That was helpful. The second question I had was on watching the breath in the abdomen.
Sure.
So what happens to me is that I end up watching myself watching the breath. It just automatically becomes me watching the breath rather than the breath itself. So is that am I doing something wrong there, or?
Right. So of course, in any of this is going to come up a little bit in the next retreat, where we talk about the resting in awareness practice. But with all of these practices, we are explicitly aware of an object. in this case, this weekend, we're explicitly aware of the sensations of the breath. But of course, implicitly, we're aware of being aware of the breath. So, but here in this practice, of course, we're keeping the attention on the object and not turning the attention to the subject. That's what we're doing in the third of the three shamatha practices, the resting in awareness. We're explicitly being aware of being the agent, the awareness. So here, no, we don't want to do that. That's a different practice. So if you notice that you're turning your attention on yourself, then just let that, that's just a distraction. Let that go and just go back to the sensations of the breath. So just whatever, that's just like another distraction. So just go back to the actual tactile sensations of the breath. That's all.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Thanks,
Sure.
thanks, yeah.
I think we've still got time for at least one more question, if anyone has.
I just had a small comment.
Sure.
Which is the first practice we did with the full body breathing awareness. That was really good. I never tried that before, but it did something the other things did not do, which was actually that I discovered to sense effects of the breathing everywhere in my body. Like suddenly I would notice like a little something relaxing in the neck, you know, which was tied to the breath. So I just wanted to share that because that was amazing.
Sure. Yeah.
Because I think that can help a lot of like energetic work and tantra practice, you know, to get that awareness of like the breath being the whole thing.
Exactly. In fact, once we get into that sort of practice at the more subtle level, we're really noticing the, like you said, the energetic movements at a more subtle level. And those energetic movements can be all over the body. And so we're really getting in tune with that. And that's going to be very, very helpful. So yes, it can be, I mean, the main emphasis is relaxation, but also it can really help us to become much more aware of what's going on in our body. And I think many of us in the modern world have really, that's blocked off because we're all in the head. We're all conceptual. We really block that out. And of course, that's to our own detriment that we've lost touch with the body. So this sort of practice, if you really get into it at a very subtle level, you can really become very receptive to all sorts of things in the body, all over the body. So very good. Thanks for that comment. We got time maybe for one quick question if anyone has, otherwise we'll take a break. No questions? Okay. So let's take another tea break. So again, a 30-minute tea break. So we'll come back in 30 minutes. So that is at 2:45 p.m. European summertime, or depending on where you are in the world. So anyway, 30 minutes time, and we'll, in the next session too, we're going to be doing the, using the Shavasana posture for meditation, the corpse posture. So not at the beginning of the session, but at the end of the session. So it would be helpful if you could arrange where you are to be able to listen and watch this, and then also have nearby a bed or a cushion or something where you can lie down for the second meditation in the next session. So we're going to do that in the next session. So until then, have a break, and we'll see you in 30 minutes.